Hello everyone and welcome to the Mash and Drum Whiskey Room and What's on the Shelf Wednesday. In this series I do quick reviews of whiskeys that you can actually find on the shelf, including bourbons, ryes, Irish whiskeys, and scotch. What's on the shelf today? A new Knob Creek small batch. Well, it's not really new, but what's new about this one is the 9-year age statement on the bottle is back. In the last several years, bottles losing age statements was the result of the bourbon boom and the growth of the bourbon whiskey segment. With so many people buying bourbons and bourbon producers realizing they didn't have enough inventory of well-aged bourbons to keep filling those age-stated bottles, age statements were being removed from the labels. About 5 years ago, Jim Beam realized that with Knob Creek sales growth, they didn't have enough inventory in the pipeline to keep it going as a 9-year age-stated bourbon, so the age statement was gradually eliminated. Fred Noe and son Freddie have been wanting to bring it back, and after a few years of label changes and increased bourbon production, the Big Beautiful 9 is back on the bottle. People maybe don't care about the age of Jim Beam White Label, says Fred Noe, but the person who orders a Knob Creek Manhattan, he wants to know it's 9 years old. Whenever an age statement is dropped from a label, it usually means one thing: there is younger whiskey now being used in that bottle. Now, since Knob Creek is a small batch bourbon, it was easy to figure you could have 4 to 6 year old bourbon being batched in there along with any 8 to 9 year bourbon they may have. Now remember, if you have an age statement on the label, by law, the youngest whiskey in that bottle has to be at least that labeled age. And that's really good news for us consumers because we know the youngest possible bourbon in this bottle has to be 9 years old. Maybe there could be some older bourbon in there batched together, but at least we know 9 years is the youngest it's gonna get, and that's really cool. And even though Knob Creek 9-year gets its age statement back, the value still remains with Knob Creek being bottled at 100 proof and available for about 30 to 35 bucks. Okay, so today I'll be trying the new 9-year age-stated bourbon and compare it with the previous label to see if I could pick up any differences, and also just to revisit one of the best values on the shelf today. So let's start with the 9-year label first. This is Classic Beam. It's caramel, vanilla, and some honey roasted peanut. You gotta love it. Definitely some cinnamon spice in there. Good amount of oak presence too. Not overpowering. Good balance with the sweetness. Getting like a nice, like a brown butter smell. When you cook some butter down and it starts turning brown, it gets that nuttiness comes out of the butter. That's definitely jumping out of the glass as well. Curious if we'll get that on the older small batch, which we're gonna compare in a second. Yeah, just, you gotta love the caramel, the vanillas, the that little bit of a cinnamon oak presence. You got that honey roasted peanut that really jumps out of the glass too. But really, the brown butter scent that's coming out of here is what I really love the most. It's a combination of sweet butter with a little bit of that honey, but also that nuttiness coming through. Pretty signature from Jim Beam. So let's have a sip, see what we get. Cheers. Oh man, it's always good to revisit a bourbon like this. Wow, it's such a good value for what you get. So on the front of the palate, I mean, you definitely can get a little bit of a tinniness. You get some oak tannins there right on the front of the palate, but all that sweetness is there. The vanilla, the caramels, that honey, a little bit of that brown butter working its way through. Then as it works its way back, then the peanut explosion just happens. This bottle, I'm getting like pure honey peanut butter on the palate there. If you ever had some like honey roasted peanut butter and get that at the store, that's what I'm getting on the palate. It's pretty cool. Let's go for another sip. The thing I love about Knob Creek is it continues to have that same consistent flavor profile as you keep going from sip to sip. You get a little bit of that tingliness. I think the cinnamon comes through a little bit more as you keep sipping. Little cinnamon red hot action. But yeah, gives a nice medium finish. Got a little bit of a Kentucky hug going on here on the finish. But yeah, all the sweet flavors up front, works its way back. A little bit more of a, brown butter. Definitely that honey roasted peanut butter. is coming through. I don't remember the older small batch being so peanut butter forward, but we're gonna test it in a second. Let's go for one more sip before we get to the finish, then we'll compare. Same thing going on. I think there's a slight hint of fruit popping out of the background as well, the more you sip it. But again, very consistent flavors from front to back. As I mentioned, vanilla, caramel, brown butter, definitely some honey roasted peanut butter action going on the finish. Then on the very, very back end, there's a slight hint of fruit. You get a little spike of cinnamon, some oak there. Just a beautifully balanced bourbon, a 9-year-old bourbon for 35 bucks. It's just a steal. All right, guys, so here we have the new 9-year age-stated bourbon, and then I guess a recent throwback, which is the older label, which was the new label of the small batch, still without the 9-year bourbon in it. You would figure there'd be some younger bourbon mixed in here, but inventory must be good because Beam has been releasing a lot of age-stated bourbons, along with the 9-year Bakers, which is a single barrel now, still keeping that nice 7-year age statement. They also released a 13-year Bakers late last year. This is the Knob Creek 12-year. And also I think there's a 15-year-old Knob Creek coming out too at 100 proof. So inventory and aging looking pretty good at Jim Beam. Let's compare these two and see if I could find any differences here. So first on the new 9-year. Let's compare it to the old label here. I would say for the most part, they are very similar, but I would say that I think the 9-year has a little bit more of a punch and sweetness. Now granted, I drank this bottle down a little bit, about halfway, so that could be incorporating some different flavor differences there. But so far on the 9-year, I feel like on the nose at least, it's just coming off a little bit sweeter and a little bit of more of an oak presence a little bit. All right, let's try the non-age stated small batch. Here we go. Same thing, very good vanilla and caramel flavors up front. Little bit of that cinnamon, not as much. Definitely there's a peanut aspect to it, but I don't think it's as strong as the one in the 9-year. Let me go for a sip here. Yeah, I wouldn't say that the 9-year is miles ahead of as far as flavor goes, but I do feel like there is a little bit more sweetness and a little bit more of that peanut butter profile going on in the 9-year. Maybe the old label, not being fully 9 years old, didn't have more of those sweet flavors pulled in from the barrel. Being there's a little bit more of some younger stuff in there probably. Let's go for another sip of the non-age statement. This one just feels a little bit lighter and a little bit fruitier on the palate. I'm getting a little bit more fruit flavors in there. The cinnamon is still there. It just doesn't seem as dark as the 9-year when it comes to flavor profile. I mean, I love this because it's a really well-balanced bourbon. It's got all the great flavors you want, the vanilla, the caramels, a little bit more fruity on the palate for me. Still pretty sweet, but the 9-year small batch here, yeah, this one, it's still sweet, but there's some darker flavors going on in there. This one reminds me more of a lower proof Booker's bourbon, where you get that really heavy peanut characteristic. You know what's crazy is this is 100 proof. Booker's they are usually around 120 proof, but Booker's is also in between 6 to 7 years old usually. They don't get too much older than that for the most part, unless it's a special release. They usually hover between 6 and 7 years old, a Booker's bourbon. And I'm getting some of those aspects of it, and this being 9 years old, I'm getting some of those richer peanut flavors that you'd get in a Booker's, rather than this one where it's coming out a little bit more fruity and sweet. Let's go for one more sip of each. All right, let me compare to this one real quick. Yeah, there is something different, I think, going on between the two of them, whereas this is a little bit lighter, sweeter, but definitely still holds some of that peanut, cinnamon, caramel, vanilla characteristic. This one is getting more towards now a Booker's type flavor profile, when you're getting a little bit more peanut, you're getting more age than a Booker's, and at 100 proof, it's still providing some great flavor. That honey roasted peanut flavor and that brown butter is what's really selling it. So yeah, if you guys see the new 9-year age statement and you're a fan of Jim Beam, if you're a fan of Booker's, for 30, 35 bucks, absolutely grab it. I think it's Really good, and I do think there's a difference between this one and the old one. All right, guys, well, thanks for watching this episode of What's on the Shelf Wednesday as we looked at Knob Creek Small Batch with the 9-year age statement back. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that subscribe button below. Please hit that like button. If you haven't yet, find me on Instagram and find me on Twitter. Let me know if you guys have found this yet, if you're looking forward to it. It should be hitting markets everywhere now soon. Jim Beam has some really great distribution. Knob Creek is usually available everywhere, but look for that number 9 on the front of the label. And as I always say, it's not about the whiskey, it's the people you share it with. So cheers, and I'll see you next time on The Mash and Drum. Take care.